We need to talk about the way that Chinese companies keep releasing leverless controllers way too quickly, and case in point, here is Premium Orange. So Haute42 contacted me about reviewing some of their latest controllers, and they said they also have this Premium Orange C16. Am I interested in showing it on the channel? So I have one and I'd like to show it to you, but I also want to have a discussion about the way that these controllers get released. So before we can get into that discussion, let's talk about what we have here today. We have the C16 that I reviewed last year, and here is the updated version, which looks very similar apart from the striking premium orange color. It does feel quite different, mainly because it has different keycaps on top. These have a much smoother convex shape, which makes it super easy to slide your fingers over. But they have made a number of other changes as well, so let's have a closer look. All right, we have Street Fighter 6 booted up, and I just want to point out that this was sent to me for the purposes of making this video, but I don't have to send it back at the end, and all opinions are my own. There is a full video review on the original C16, but I'll just give you the lowdown here right now. It's a leverless controller that's under $100, so it's a very easy recommendation to make, and it has pretty much everything you could need. So fast forward 1 year, and we now have the orange version of the C16, and it's called Premium Orange, and it actually feels fairly premium, especially when you look at things like the back. It has this nice sheen to the aluminium, which definitely shows up better on the orange compared to the original C16, which I guess you can see has become a bit of a fingerprint magnet. But then again, it could just be that I've been using it for a while now. So just to show you how it works in game, obviously I've got all the same functions as normal. I can move left and I can move right. I can jump with my jump button. I've set that to this button down here, but you can also use this button to jump. Depending on which tournament you're going to, make sure you check the rules whether you can actually have 2 up buttons. We got all the normal SOCD stuff. Pressing left and right causes neutral, pressing down and up causes neutral. We've also got various shortcuts that still work, things like the Dragon Punch shortcut, or things like being able to hold down a direction then just be able to quickly tap the opposite direction to do dashes. The buttons do feel fantastic, and that's down to 2 major changes to these buttons. On the original C16, we had these purple switches. I believe these are called wind engine switches. They feel good. They sound good. One of the trends we're seeing in more recent controllers is the use of these shadow hunting switches. They really don't feel that significantly different to me, but what does feel really different on this controller is these buttons caps, because as you can see, they fall off much more smoothly compared to the previous buttons. It might not seem that clear on camera, but it's got much flatter edges over here and a slightly flatter edge on top, although it does have a sort of convex feel. This one is much more convex overall. It's got a slightly flat area in the middle, but then it starts to tail off very, very quickly, and then very, very smoothly over to the edge. On the C16, you can slide your fingers over these buttons. It's honestly not an issue, but you definitely feel the edge of each button kind of bumping into your finger as you do it. By having these much rounder buttons, it feels like it's 0% chance that they would ever get pulled out of their socket, because they are extremely, extremely smooth. Like, you could do this all day and it wouldn't really hurt. You do this on the original C16, like, after like 2 or 3 seconds, it's already kind of, I feel like my finger's kind of vibrating. I don't count this as a necessary feature, but it's definitely a welcome change. Now, in the move to Premium Orange, obviously various things have changed. The whole body of the controller is a plastic orange in addition to the aluminum base, but even these non-slip pads on the base are also orange. We've also got this orange push button. The whole thing is orange, 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 and I have absolutely no idea. I don't think there's ever been any demand. I don't think there's any like sudden thing in esports where everyone is using orange controllers. It's just striking and new, and a great reason to get it onto reviewers' YouTube channels. You've still got your lock switch, which turns off the labels on these buttons when you are in lock mode, but you can also turn off the RGB on these buttons, and this light that goes actually all the way around the controller. I mentioned that on the original C16 as well. There's no gap here where the USB cable goes in. So if I toggle this switch here, you can see it turns off that ring light, but also turns off the surrounds on these rims as well. Now, one thing I've noticed on the more recent controllers is they're using this slightly frosted acrylic instead of the original one, but it's not clear to me, no pun intended, it's actually not clear to me which models come with the clear one and which ones don't. I'm not sure if some controllers still come with clear and some don't, but as far as I can tell, on the Premium Orange, it's like like assured that the newest edition does come with the frosted acrylic, which means that you can still see the design, but it's not as clear. And obviously when you're looking at it at an angle, already at this angle, you can't see the design at all, which is quite nice for these lights, because as you can see, as I turn the controller further and further away and you look at it from an angle, the light is dispersed much more evenly. Now, in addition to this base design they've got here, it does still come with two of these blank white ones, so you can draw on them or print directly on them if you want to make your own designs. But I believe these designs are different. They look different to me compared to the original C16, but I'll model this one for you, because by using orange, it actually kind of looks like it's got holes in the design. It's like these are actual gaps in the design and we're seeing the orange beneath, but it's actually just printed color orange. So there are definitely some cool effects you can achieve by making it look like the orange underneath here is visible. And if you don't want artwork at all, you can just go straight in with no artwork, and it does actually look quite nice in my opinion. I've never ever wanted an orange controller. It never occurred to me like I would love to have an orange controller, but it does look striking. So if you're looking to be different, and this is a market where pretty much every controller that comes out, every leverless controller that comes out is usually black plastic or black aluminium. Orange, very striking. So honestly, my short review of the C16 is that it's pretty much the same as the original C16, but it is very nice to have these softer, smoother, more round buttons. Personally, if I were buying a C16 today, I probably would buy the orange one just because these buttons are nicer, but also because in the world of leverless controllers where everything looks like black plastic, it's really nice to have something a little bit unique. So that's everything I wanted to talk about the C16 itself, but now I just want to talk about Chinese controllers, because I've been reviewing them for years now, but never really had this full discussion. Now, there's lots of stuff that we could talk about when it comes to the world of leverless controllers, like the fact that so many of them use the Community Edition GP2040 firmware, which is not compatible with consoles unless you have an adapter, but it does mean it's very cheap to make a controller for PC. I would like to talk about all that stuff in the future, but today I want to talk about the way that Chinese companies update their products. And it's not just the leverless controller world. This happens in the smartphone world. This happens in the camera industry. This happens in so many things. You've probably noticed that a lot of the big brands you remember, like big American brands or big Japanese brands, they come up with their products maybe once every year or every few years or so. But it feels like Chinese companies, they just drop new products all the time. And I don't know if this is just the way that maybe Japanese companies were as well in the past, and American companies as well. Maybe some of these Chinese companies, maybe just because they're new, that's how they iterate and they get themselves to a competitive position. But there's something interesting about the way that they sell these controllers. And I think it's more that they see them as a thing that people will just buy and upgrade and constantly upgrade. I see this as well because I buy a lot of camera related things. I have a camera related channel, and obviously in the camera world, it's like even worse. With leverless controllers, it's a little bit different, because once you've got a controller you like, most people in the old days, I feel, you would get an arcade stick, like a Mad Catz TE2, when Mad Catz was a different company than the company it is today. And you would just use that for like the next 8 years. You probably wouldn't upgrade. And then when the new consoles came out, if they said that it wasn't compatible with the old arcade sticks, you'd actually be really upset. You'd be like, what? I can't use the arcade stick that I've been using for the past 8 years on the new console that I plan to use for the next 6, 7, 8 years? Like, man, I can't believe that. But I think nowadays, it's expected, or at least the companies are expecting, that you're going to buy a controller today with 15 buttons, and then next year they're going to make a thing out of having 16 buttons, and then they're going to make a thing out of having 17 buttons. Like you can already see on this layout here, which personally I think is already kind of optimal. It already has more buttons than I need. Personally, I don't need this WASD jump button up here. I never use the shortcut button up here. I love having a left shortcut button and a right shortcut button down here, but really I don't feel like I need anything else. But you know that some of these 17 button layouts, they add an extra pinky button over here. Sometimes we have like pill shaped buttons. Sometimes we have multiple shortcut buttons on the left and the right here. There's so many different ways to encourage people to upgrade to something that maybe they don't really need. at the current time, these controllers are so inexpensive that it's not a big deal, actually. It's like, okay, I spent $100 last year, but I can afford to buy a new controller, a completely brand new controller, if it gives me one extra button this year. And then next year, what if I get a controller that also has like a bigger screen on it, or it has more ports, or it has more buttons over here, or tournament lock switches, or a cable lock port, or so many things that we can do to encourage people to buy new controllers. But as you've probably seen with the big Japanese companies, they've really just left it to the Chinese companies to handle it, which means that we're in the way that Chinese products get sold. And it's like, here's a new controller, 6 months later, here's a slightly better one, another 6 months later, okay, here's a completely new controller, which is way better than the one before. But in fighting game world, it's like, well, better is better, but really I've kind of got what I need. I'm curious as to how long they can actually keep this up, because I'm sure that at the moment, as Street Fighter 6 is still buzzing and booming and bringing in new players who are interested in playing fighting games, and everyone is telling them, you know, you should probably just stick with leverless because it's already kind of optimal and what you're probably used to if you come from other games where you play on a pad or if you play on a keyboard and mouse. But at what point will the Chinese companies just kind of pull out because the growth isn't there anymore? At the moment, we have Haute42, but there's a wealth of other Chinese brands also making leverless controllers, and some of them are like sub-brands of Haute42. They can pump a lot of money into pushing out new controllers because there's growth. But I feel like at some point, fighting, it's going to like tail off, and we're not going to have as many new players coming in because we'll already just be sustaining a large body of players, mostly Street Fighter 6 players. And they're all going to be like, well, I've kind of got the controller I need from Haute42 and I don't need a new one. So this whole like releasing the new orange version of the C16 or the C17 or you know 18 or 19 or 20, just whatever the new button gets added to the layout, or just slightly spacing them apart, so you've got a sort of split layout or a more split layout or a very split layout or split into two halves. I'm all for innovation in the world of controllers, but it just definitely feels like after the Chinese companies discovered that this was a major growth segment of the market that they could capitalize on, it feels like there's been a large amount of growth that I don't think we're going to see maybe in a few years' time when they're like, I think the growth has slowed down, maybe we're going to start pulling out of these markets. And I've mentioned this before, but then when we have companies that can mass produce these things very, very cheaply, eventually, if they pull out, and this is the same thing with esports sponsors, they come in, they go, wow, fighting games, big money to be made. And when they realize, actually, there's not a lot of money to be made in the fighting game industry, and then they leave, we're kind of stuck with like the empty husk of what was, and we don't have the support of the smaller builders and the smaller tournaments and the smaller things that were run by people that didn't have a lot of money. And I'm not saying that like big companies are bad and small companies are good. Absolutely not saying that at all. But I did mention this in a previous video, that if we're always aiming to make controllers as cheaply as possible and en masse, you know, mass producing these things, then eventually the smaller players, they don't sell enough. Like even some of these smaller companies, I'm sure that they only need to sell like maybe 100 controllers a year to like stay afloat. Probably maybe they're like doing it as a side business. Like, if some of those companies really just cannot compete at all, then eventually they're going to quit, move on, and get regular day jobs, maybe doing other stuff. And then we just have genuinely fewer options. And I think when the big companies eventually pull out, I'm just curious, I'm like, how many of the small builders will still remain after the big companies pull out? And again, it's the same thing with esports. It's like, how many of the small tournaments will still exist after the big money pulls out of sponsorships? I think it's something that we should definitely talk about in the future. I'm all for this controller. Obviously, minor upgrades. So if I already had a C16, I would not upgrade to this just because it has like the slightly different buttons. If I were buying a C16 fresh and new today, I would choose this just because the buttons are nicer, and also it's nice to have something that's a completely wild color compared to what everyone else is probably walking around with, which is just black plastic with, you know, black aluminium, and it's got a bit of a nice sheen to it. Even just holding it in front of the camera here, you can see like it does this nice reflective thing. Listen, the only purpose originally of making this video was to show you like the new C16 that came out in orange, but I really wanted to talk about this because it's something I've been thinking about but haven't really had an opportunity to discuss. It's just the way that Chinese companies come in and then they pump out massive numbers of new models of these controllers, and then eventually I think they like get kind of tired of the market and then they move on. And what really makes me curious is what's left after the big mass-producing companies lose interest in these markets. Yes, they are interested in fighting games, and they obviously do have a passion for designing these controllers for us, but, you know, I think big companies go where the money is, and if they can find a different esports trend that's coming up, they'll probably move on to that one. For now, though, we have the support of Haute42 or Cosmox Gaming. I really wish they could decide what their branding is on that. Like, they can't decide, is this Haute42 or Cosmox? Is this Cosmox up here, and it says Haute42 down here? Actually, the orange version's not on any of the websites. It's not on the Haute42 website, and it's not on the Cosmox Gaming website, so I'm confused, but whatever. At least it's the same price. They called it premium orange. There's nothing premium about this orange, but they called it premium orange, and that usually would be some kind of excuse to like increase the price. It's like, this is the premium version of the C16, but it's not. It's actually just the C16, and it's the same price as the C16, and it actually is better. There's one final point I want to make about these controllers, and it's that because they update them so frequently, it does become very confusing when buying them online. First of all, you have the two major online retailers. I don't see that many of these in shops. I think I have seen maybe some of these Chinese companies in shops before, but it's not that common. Usually I think people are expected to just buy this directly from them, from AliExpress or from Amazon. Now, personally, I have a minor anxiety attack, not a real one, like it feels like an anxiety attack every single time I go on the AliExpress website, so I avoid it with, you know, I just avoid it. But on Amazon, sometimes these products are not in stock, or if it's brand new, it's like only on AliExpress, we have to like wait a few months before it shows up on Amazon. There's that, but then there's the fact that when people look up C16, because they have the same model name, people are going to look at these controllers online and go, yeah, I heard that the new C16 is amazing. I'll just buy a new C16. And they'll think that all of these old C16s have now been upgraded with the new buttons and stuff. But that's not the case. As far as I can tell online, the listings for the old one do come with the old switches, with the old keycaps, and obviously the original color design and the inlays. If you want the C16 that's orange with the new buttons and the shadow hunting switches, you do have to choose the one that says C16 Premium Orange. People who are like, well, I like the look of the Premium Orange, but I kind of prefer the original black design, and if I'm still going to have all of the new features, I'll just get the black one. But what you don't know is that by choosing the black one, you don't get the new switches and the new keycaps. So that's something that I also find quite confusing, but it's not just Chinese companies. Like Apple has been doing this the whole time. So iPad 3 came out, and then instead of calling it iPad 3, they called it the new iPad. I'm sure there were people who probably went and bought the wrong iPad thinking, well, the new one is generation 4. Actually, what you bought was the new iPad, which was actually the old iPad. I kind of wish that they had just named it something else, like C16 version 2. Anyway, that's all I wanted to share with you today. There's a new version of this controller. It is upgraded, and fortunately the price is the same as before, which is fantastic. But I have some questions about the fact that there's so many of these controllers coming out. How long is this really sustainable for, and what happens when the big companies pull out? What are we really left with? By the way, one thing I wanted to mention is that the CAS, the arcade stick that Haute42 makes with the removable lever and is incredibly thin, I made a review for this, but when I posted that video, it was actually perfectly the moment when it was out of stock everywhere. And Haute42 did want, they said like, could you release the video like when it's actually in stock? But the thing is, I had actually already released the video, so I told them I'll just post on my community page. And since I'm making a video about the C16, I'll just let you know here that the CAS is apparently in stock. I checked on Amazon, I couldn't even find a listing for it, so maybe it's still not on Amazon, but it does seem to be in stock and available for like relatively quick delivery on AliExpress, which personally I don't really like using, but you know, it is available. So now you know it's in stock, and sorry to Haute42 that I didn't release the video when it was in stock originally, but it's in stock now, and now you know. That's all for today. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon.